This has been an interesting week in the broadcast world with the passing of Vin Scully, with the amount of time you've been around Major League Baseball. Can you imagine doing that job for 67 years like he did? Did you meet Scully? Did you know him? What was he like?
Hang on a minute.
I don't know what I said.
Was he out there?
Oh, there we go.
This is one of my most cherished items. Let me slide it over there.
Look at that.
That is in 1984 Tiger Stadium. Joe Garagiola and Vin Scully doing the NBC Game of the Week. And back then, they would invite a player to introduce the lineup. Yep. And I introduced the Blue Jays lineup that day. And I got to spend some time with them and meet them. And it's really interesting. And we had dinner last night with the Orges, Patty and Garth Orge. And Patty Orge told us she was flying to that game and got to her connection, I believe, in Chicago. And they said, "I'm sorry, we don't have a seat for you." And she said, "What? I've been booked and everything else." Vin Scully and Joe Garagiola heard the ruckus at the counter and gave her their seat. And she got the line.
Really?
How about that?
No kidding, huh?
Yeah. But that's, you know what? That's who they were. That's what they were all about. They weren't into, "I'm Joe Garagiola and I'm Vin Scully." They were great people.
Yeah.
And they were wonderful people. And no matter who it was that you met, I mean, Garagiola was a wonderful baseball storyteller because he played with all those great Cardinal teams. And, he always talked about Gibson and then the great players for the Cardinals and everything else. Growing up with Yogi. I mean, how many times did we hear him talk about growing up with Yogi? And then Vin Scully goes back to Brooklyn, and he talked about Jackie Robinson when he saw him. And he saw every one of the Dodger greats. And he could remember and tell stories. And, it was just wonderful. And he introduced so many people. And, I was a Giant fan, as Vin Scully was.
Yeah.
He was a Giant fan growing up. But in California, there was a definite line between Northern California Giant fans and Southern California Dodger fans. And we used to hear, "Hey, it's time for Dodger baseball." And he would come on. My guys were Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons. The two great Giant announcers who also came from New York. But in fact, Russ Hodges was working with Vin Scully and Red Barber during the playoff game in 51. And Russ Hodges was the Giants radio announcer. And he's the guy I grew up with. But Vin Scully, we'll never see anybody like him, who was so gracious to everyone he came in contact with. And he was so good at what he did. He was phenomenal. And unfortunately, we're losing so many of these icons. And we all know Ernie Harwell.
I know. Yeah.
Ernie Harwell and Tom Cheek and those wonderful voices that were iconic. And you related them to the team. Vin Scully, Dodgers, Ernie Harwell, Tigers, Tom Cheek, Blue Jays, and it goes on and on and on. And that's just the way it was.
I spent the early 80s in Las Vegas, or through most of the 80s, actually. And I can recall vividly the first time and the Dodgers, I mean, Vegas is not that far from LA, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 4-hour drive, and it's basically Dodger town. And I turned on a Dodger game in the car one day and literally sat in the driveway of my house. I got home, I don't know when, middle of the game or something, and listened to the rest of the game in the car. And Vinny did not have a sidekick.
Right.
He was by himself in the booth. And it was mesmerizing to listen to him more than anybody else, with due respect to everybody else. This guy was somebody you had to listen to. Buck.
Yeah, he was, and Ross Porter was there for a while, and they didn't work together, but Ross Porter would fill in for him, go back and forth. And Vinny, I mean, this is an all-time manly thing. Vinny was so important to the Dodgers and Dodgers radio, they installed a urinal right behind his booth.
There you go.
Hey,
didn't Porter just do TV? And Vinny
I think he did some radio.
I think when Scully went to do TV, Porter went to do radio.
That's what
I think that's what happened in those days.
They
Yeah.
didn't work together.
They never worked together, but they were a part of the
Ross
same.
Porter was another. He was a very good broadcaster in his own right, but he certainly wasn't in the same class. And
Not
nobody
that,
was.
not that you would remember, but because it was a while ago. You know, when we used to, when as a reporter, you'd go in the clubhouse, and I'd be in awe because I was just a kid when the few times I went into the Jays dugout or the Jays clubhouse. I remember meeting Billy Martin, but what was it when Scully would come in the clubhouse? I mean, it was almost like the players would gravitate to him. I hear.
Oh yeah, no question. I mean, he was such an iconic, and you know, Vin Scully and Dick Enberg and Al Michaels and all those guys that were on national TV. You knew who they were, and you know there was only one game a week. So when Vin and Joe were doing Game of the Week, it was a special day, and everybody got a chance to see them. So we all knew who they were, obviously. But then for me to have the honor of and doing the lineup card, and these guys came over, and of course Gradiola, you know, he was a ball buster. He was one of those kind of guys that would always be jabbing at you and everything else. And Scully was the opposite. It was just a great team that they had.
You know, my background in television, Buck, is more in hockey, obviously, and I've been accused of hiring too many goaltenders over the years. But I'll tell you what, you look at catchers. You look at when Garagiola was a catcher. You know, Tim McCarver was a catcher. You were a catcher. There was something to be said with that position in the broadcast booth.
Well,
because
think about a goalie too.
Yeah,
goalie's the only one on the ice that sees the whole game in front of him.
Right.
And goalies are involved in every aspect of coaching. So when you talk about defense, the goalie's involved with that. You talk about offense, it's how we start to rush and all that stuff. So catchers and goalies are very similar in their view of the game and how the game unfolds. And the game's coming at you as a goalie, and as a catcher, it's going away from you. But you're the only two people in the respective games that have the game in front of you. You see the whole game. A winger or a center or a defenseman, they see parts of the ice and parts of the game. They don't see the whole game like a goalie.
I tell you what, you're speaking like a guy who's been in Toronto since 1981.